welcome on the stream and on the program. We're honored to have as a guest a real scholar. I've been to his site and been talking with him, and he's really knowledgeable about things cyber in a very, very important way. It's a privilege to have him here to share some of his understanding of the contemporary situation, particularly in terms of technological developments in their very advanced form. His name is Stuart Mason Dambrot. And I think without me wasting time anymore, just to introduce him to this ACAP meeting on April 25 of the year 2011, let's all give an applause to Mr. Dambrot and welcome to everybody.
Hear, hear.
Well, that was very kind, Harold. Thank you. Of course, I won't be talking about anything technological tonight.
Oh, sorry.
But you have to keep it lively. So, when Harold asked me to do this, I thought, well, what would be really something appropriate and germane to speak to a bunch of producers about? And I started thinking about communications, about how we frame what we say. We're going to say something, how we consider the audience, how we, what's necessary that goes into the package of creating an integrated form of communication, whether it's video or something else. And then I started thinking, well, perhaps one of the most important things is what's the internal dialogue? What is it when we're communicating? Are we aware of our assumptions? Are we aware of the things we believe without questioning to the point where we don't even know that we're communicating a meaning? When we either talk to someone, talk to ourselves, or set up some form of media to share. So, that's very unappealing. So that said, I thought of, I called it, unfortunately we can't have the presentation on the wall, but those who wish to can see it here. But I called it All the Minds of Stage. I thought people in this room would appreciate that little play. And also, what it's about is...
Hey.
Yeah. So that's it's just focusing on different aspects of the cognitive environment that lead to ways of thinking and expressing ourselves that aren't necessarily in phase with physical reality. I'll just put it that way. So with that, what is in fact the context of consciousness? It's a loaded question because consciousness is something that's referred to in the literature as a quality. It's one of the set of qualia. We all know we have it. We believe we have it. We can talk about it, and it's notoriously difficult to actually define because it's experiential, rather than something that at this point we can identify as correlated with a particular set of neurons or other brain structures. So that being said, I looked at three components that might make an interesting discussion. One would be consilience. After Edward Wilson, a biologist, wrote a book of the same name published in 2008, he took the term from a much earlier writer, but it didn't have the same meaning at that point anyway, so we forgive him. And his one-phrase summary is the unity of knowledge. So just as in physics, there's a quest for a unified theory of physics, this is a unified theory of knowledge in the sense of finding common grounds between different areas of human intellectual and creative expression, but not just conceptually. Where Wilson as a biologist went, and where I go, is to the neuroscience. Because whether one agrees with anything I'm saying here or not, that disagreement and that vocalization is happening in the brain. Whether you like the clothing someone is wearing and say something or not, it's all, there's perception, there's brain activity, and there's behavior. Now that sounds reductionistic, and in many ways it is. But I want to point out that one thing that reductionists often don't discuss, the way they dismiss higher level processes and events, is to ignore levels of scale. For example, the term society. The term society is a name that describes the collective behavior and institutions of a particular culture at a point in time. But what are those behaviors? Well, those behaviors eventually are groups or of individuals. Each one of those groups ultimately is composed of individuals. Each one of those individuals has a brain, right? Well, hopefully. So it still comes down to it that whatever the neural activity is, whatever the emotional activation is in the limbic system, whatever's going on, comes down to something that we don't have a handle on yet, but we're getting there in terms of levels of scale within the brain itself. So that's Consilientist. So I take a great lead from him. In fact, I was doing this before I read the book, and then I found a name for my pain, which was, Consilientist really defined it quite well. The second thing that's important, which will be probably more commonly, will be more familiar, is paradigms. We remember the paradigm shifts. That was really outwardly focused in terms of discontinuous changes in a society or a culture, or from, let's say, manufacturing to a service economy, whatever major discontinuities are. But I am looking more at paradigms after a philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And what was critical about what he pointed out, with which I agree, but some don't, is that the context within which scientists, there are two types of scientists. There are those like the Einsteins who institute a paradigm shift, if you will, in how we understand the physical universe. And then there's day-to-day science, which has to do with continual formulation of hypotheses designed to run experiments that seek to disprove the theory. Because unlike many people think, scientists don't try to prove theories, they try to disprove them. And the longer theory stands up in the face of attempts to disprove it, the stronger it becomes as a theory. For example, Einsteinian relativity has fended itself against innumerable attempts to test it and prove it false, and it hasn't failed yet. Why this is important is that Einstein, when faced with quantum mechanics, said two things. A part of quantum mechanics has to do with uncertainty. Probability is a fundamental part of the structure of the physical universe at the quantum level. So, Einstein famously said about the uncertainty principle, forget about it. What he said was, God does not play dice with the universe. He couldn't accept it. The other thing he couldn't accept about quantum mechanics was something called entanglement, which we can actually make happen on our own. It happens naturally, where two particles become synchronized in a way that they become like two aspects of the same particle, regardless of the distance separating them. So they can be the opposite ends of the universe. You change the spin or some other property of one, the other one changes simultaneously. They're connected in a way we don't understand. But we're using it in technology, quantum encryption and other forms of quantum electronics. So about that, he said, he called it spooky action at a distance. And he just said, he devoted his, the rest of his life to look for something he called hidden variables, hidden local variables that would account for this without resorting to what he called spooky action at a distance. He did not succeed. But that's that story. And finally, framing. Our friend George Lakoff. Most of us who know him from the political arena. He gave us a clear understanding of why the Republicans were so successful in getting their messages out, which are totally fact-free most of the time, but because they're very masterful, not only at marching in lockstep on a message basis, but they're very good at using emotionally activating terminology that get people to feel as if they're getting information when they're not. And so framing is very important. Now these are all kind of external and standard ways of interpreting these terms. What I'm going to talk about now is how it also is going on internally. When I'm talking to you now, when you're listening to me, when you are going to ask a question, whatever it might be, it's always going on that we have a set of assumptions about the world, about ourselves, about the universe that we're not really articulating, but inform everything we say and think. And that's what the rest of this is about. So, we talked about Consilientist and Wilson. I just did mention that it does seek specifically to find integration and commonality between science, humanities, social science. And one of the cool things that can be looked at as evidence for this approach is in functional MRI imaging. The fMRI scans that are taken, let's say, of someone experiencing whatever, the excitement or whatever they feel when they solve a mathematical proof, or when they're creating a work of art, or when they're listening to Bach, or whatever it might be that gives them pleasure, the same areas light up. So even though the tasks themselves and the disciplines are very different, the experience is common. So this is, this is pretty interesting. And it points to, again, a common source of a lot of our motivation and our quest for expression. A little more detail on paradigm shift is pretty much, I covered it all. What's important here, I think, if anyone can see it, is that within Kuhn's position and within our daily lives, our beliefs determine what we consider possible. In science, it determines what scientists consider to be a hypothesis worth pursuing, which sometimes leads to years of wasted time, like when Minsky declared, erroneously, he later admitted that neural networks were not a valid approach. Perceptrons were not a valid approach to artificial intelligence, and he finally acknowledged, well, I was wrong, sorry.
Jerry,
But he, basically there were methods of funding where scientists interested in neural networks did get that. So that's the kind of thing that beliefs can
anywhere safe from me.
So far, so good? Yeah? Okay. And framing, we talked about what's critical here. This is a little more internal. You had something they called the embodied mind. Basically, that metaphorical understanding is fundamental to human communication. That reasoning and logic are very superficially rejects a mind-body duality, and that this embodied cognition, sensory, motor, and emotional experiences account for far more of our communications than a rationalist would care to admit. So that's the basic context of the talk. Now, here are the example I gave. I mentioned the Einsteinian example, but there are other ones that we know about. Cosmology. Well, it was the case in the time of Ptolemy, for a long time afterwards, that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and all the lights in the sky were fixed points on little shells that moved around the Earth. What went wrong? What went wrong was it worked. It allowed them to predict the motions of the stars and planets pretty well. It had nothing to do with physical reality. Nothing. So they were thinking about a universe that didn't exist, even though they could pragmatically predict some of its behavior. And this is critical because in this, and this is what's known as induction, Aristotelian inductive reasoning. You observe, and from the observation you come up with laws. Well, those laws, they may work, but they could be lacking. And this applies to our internal and our daily lives as well. Another one, even going further back, is the emergence of atomism. This is highly speculative, but I think it's possible to imagine, our earliest ancestors seeing that life is self-propelling, and then seeing a leaf that looks like it's alive, but it's moved by the wind. And they erroneously infer from observation that there must be something living in the wind, giving motion to the leaf. Right, so again, it's not physical reality, but it forms a belief system within which they think about the world. And they can have arguments about it back and forth. They can say, no, this wind god is better than that wind god. But the point is, they're talking about something in a closed system, because they have no way of verifying whether or not there is such a thing as a wind god. And that's what this kind of this framing does internally in our own So, I'll have to go back. But anyway, I have here a series of ways of organizing the three components, if you will. And this is where I was going to ask which one people would vote for in terms of a sequence. The first one was a pyramid with consilience at the top. The second one here is a linear process moving from one consilience to paradigms. In other words, what's the process of forming these belief systems? And where does this come into play? Where does this come into play?
Well, I mean, I saw the first thing when the circles overlap. So, I mean, to me, it really is a matter of at the moment. Certain things come into play at a moment when, let's say, consilience comes into play at a certain point, and then you may be thinking, well, I have to tell somebody about something else, and then framing comes into play. I think this is a dynamic system. The paradigm is when you accept where you are in your life, in your society, whatever, at a given moment, because you're dealing with various paradigms anyway. You're not just dealing with one, there's several that go on at the same time. And I think that first one you had up there, where they're sort of united, it's just that one becomes prominent at the moment that you need.
That's right. Circular, kind of a cyclical process.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that I think is close.
Yeah. Because this means, you're always going to start there. No, you're not.
That's right.
You're going to start. Maybe you're going to start framing. You say, and then you're just going to sit back and go into someplace else.
But you're right, because then if you start framing, but the framing that you're doing is impacted by your assumptions in the paradigm phase. So yeah, it is.
It's a dynamic.
I agree. That's how I see it.
Yeah, it's a dynamic process.
And the whole thing is rather amazing. But recently, I was at a talk where we were talking about can you get different societies to talk about things and understand similar problems and so on. And immediately, I began thinking about two people. Now, Korzybski, who was a guy who talked about general semantics, gave you the impression that when one person speaks and says something, he's thinking about something entirely different than what is heard in the other head. And then it's a question of how you even get negotiated thoughts to happen. So the whole idea here is like very, very curious about how one gets these three processes to go on in two different heads, two different individuals, and how you're able to get any kind of coalescence of concepts, framing the paradigms, and be talking about similar things. There's something amazing going on, because you've got neurons firing, and that alone is amazing enough, and now you've got these other domains.
It is remarkable, and yet we do it. We're having a conversation that we all think we understand. And so it happens. And the reason that I see is that accounts for that is, like you said, the brain is very plastic. It's a combination of genetically expressed tissue plus experience, where the brain is a self-modifying organ, right? And it's not just memory. It's always forming new connections. Older connections become weaker. All of that stuff is going on all the time.
So you're talking about feedback loops and many things interacting between the two people to allow that to take place and have that common conception going on.
Now, the thing that's really interesting about your comment is that there are many things going on. If we have a common vocabulary, even that is not real, because it has different connotations. It just reminds you of this very funny story. One of the first attempts at computer translation between Russian and English. I was in a grad school class at the time about this, and it was going on. And the phrase in English was, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Ran it through this great algorithm. Oh, this is going to be great. And I got it out to the Russian, and when it was back translated to English, it came out as, the vodka is fine, but the meat is so-so.
Great.
So that on a lesser degree, that happens between people speaking the same language, sharing the same vocabulary, because of all the experiential connotations, the emotional connotations, what makes someone, I remember once at this consulting firm, I had a friend that was working there, and he loved to do all the details and the spreadsheets, and this stuff makes me nuts. And I said, how could you do that all day? He said, I find it comforting. So there's so many ways, there's so many varieties of and interpretations of the same experience. So I take your point, well, it is amazing that we can even, give someone directions and they get there.
Right, fantastic.
It's a very good point.
Even with all the assumptions that we make in between.
Yeah, exactly. Even in the Matrix, there was a little play on it near the end where he tells him, it's a door to the left, and Keanu Reeves' character goes right. He says, no, your other left. Yeah, that's a very good point there. This one is also, kind of interesting, right? Because it's something, it's quasi-linear, but it has the dynamism you were talking about.
Yeah.
This is the one I'm partial to. And I'll show you why. Because it moves, unlike, a lot of times people think of context and so on, which is kind of analogous to framing and paradigms as something you consider, like you consider the context of the audience. What's the demographic? What's the budget? How much of quality, production quality can we afford? But we're looking at context here as something within which, if you will, the framing and the actual content, the actual paradigm itself is occurring. So it's a little bit different, and I think it may correspond. There's a researcher, her name is Heather Berlin, here in New York, and she's a neuroscientist, and she's dedicated to finding neuroscientific evidence that lines up with psychoanalytic terminology, so unconscious, subconscious. She's making some progress. I think it might be a forlorn task because it's, psychoanalysis is essentially a philosophy of mind, and there's no, it's based on experience that we're aware of things that we don't know, all that stuff. But nonetheless, when we're sitting here talking, we have a common background, Judeo-Christian culture, perhaps, certainly Western culture. I lived in Japan for a long time, and I will tell you, it's very different. What is framed before people, even if they speak perfect English or I speak perfect Japanese, what is being communicated is some fundamental disconnect about worldview. So this is why I like, the more I think about it, I like what you were saying. I kind of like the more dynamic approach now.
Yeah, because why would you have Consilientist vessels in the center, in the middle?
Yeah, okay, well,
Because the Consilientist is in the middle because it forms the common
biological
connectivity, biological and the common connectivity between, the other aspects of the communications process. This is, but I like my actually.
Yeah.
I like better.
We may switch the order of slides
Yeah, I
after
think
this.
we might actually do that.
one quick intervention, if we could. Rosalie's coming. Don't let anybody know about we're going to sing the song on Saturday when we have
We've forgotten.
Okay.
I never knew.
So that's it.
Wonderful.
That's it. Are there any other questions, comments? Yes.
When you're dealing with the human being in communication, you take into consideration the 5 bodies that we supposedly are: the mental, the spiritual, the astral body, the conscious body, the unconscious body.
This is a very good question. This is a very good question. I believe, my personal belief, and this is a personal belief, that there is no mind-body dualism. That these are all, these are kinds of things we give names to as part of our experience. I think that our experience of mind is our experience of our brain's activity. So I don't actually think that there is a separate, like mind-body spirit separation. I don't think that there are other separate entities. I think we are one thing. But that's that's how I experience it. That's how I look at it. So what I do though is consider that if someone does see the world that way, I do my best to map that to a belief structure that's consistent and at least coherent so that people can have a discussion that means something. But in terms of physical reality, I don't personally believe that there are these separate bodies.
What if the physical body has an extreme respiratory problem? The physical body cannot breathe. That affects the brain. What if the physical body circulatory system, there's not enough blood getting to the brain?
Yes, I agree.
That affects the brain. So each and every individual has a different mindset. So
Well, but we all have, if every one of us in this room, regardless of whether we thought that there is only one physical body or there are these other, non-substantial bodies, if we stopped having blood flow to the brain or oxygen, we'd all have the same fate, regardless of how we conceive of the structure of the universe.
If you ask questions from the back, try to talk up for the microphone, okay? It's on the table.
That's a very good question, because there are a number of beliefs that we hold that need to be addressed in conversations like this.
Question? Can you tell us why you got interested in this, what the history is of this kind of an interest for you?
Oh, wow, that's a good one, and probably not, because it's always been this way. When I was trying to remember how far back it goes, I think my father told me my first word was Tyrannosaurus. Not mom, not dad, whatever. They used to read to me when I was 7. I asked my parents, if I was on a rocket ship and I went to the moon faster than the speed of light, could I land, turn around, and watch the image coming? They didn't know what the hell I was talking about. But I was always, in this space of looking beyond what was in front of me. So I don't know when it actually started. It's kind of always been. I remember yelling up to a friend in a window, when I was about 9. I said, there's a small probability that the matter above the car could disperse and the car could rise in the air. I said, that's impossible. I said, no, it's only very, very improbable. And he said,
And then the car rose.
So a follow-up, maybe more easy for you. Where do you think this could take us? Where would this be valuable for us?
While I was even thinking of other things along the way, it's a very interesting question. I realized, at least I believe I realized when I was young that one language was not more correct than another. And then I said, well, if a religion is therefore a language for understanding spirituality, how can one be more correct than another? So I started developing this view that if the universe is one thing, well, that includes us, right? That, yes, there are levels of scale from whatever's below quantum, quarks, and below that to the Planck scale, all the way up to the universe itself, and there are different properties that emerge. But it's one thing, and we're part of that one thing. We have the illusion, for example, I just started thinking when I was young, that we are in this empty space moving around. Well, no, it's not really empty. It's full of stuff. It's full of molecules, and it's full of little particulate matter that we can't see, and it's, more importantly than anything, the quantum equation that describes each body propagates essentially to infinity in all directions with decreasing probability. So we really are literally connected in a way that is not available to our senses because we didn't evolve to look at that level of scale. So I think that's when I really started getting into this heavily. So I'm sorry.
And the value of this for
the value for me
and for others
is that I guess it's okay to talk a little bit about one's. I guess I consider myself a secular humanist. So that being said, I really don't like it when the strong victimize the weak. I do not like it when people get what they can in life, even if it means others have to suffer, that they don't. So because of those sensibilities, and since I believe that we're a very young species and haven't come very far yet, and we still do very caveman-like things to each other. I believe that an understanding of why we act that way, and given that we can modify, the brain is self-modifying, that with some insight and discipline, we can perhaps accelerate our evolution to a point where we stop treating each other that way. And that's one of the things that makes a lot of big difference to me, you know, on a personal level.
Could I ask something? I got a bunch of questions that come up. I look forward to Thursday, but language. But the other thing is, at the level of material reality, do you think it is that we will ever, as some people have tried to postulate, have such progress made in terms of the percentage of the world population that could reasonably seen within definable terms be what would roughly be called haves as opposed to have-nots? That is, could we ever get to a point perhaps where, Fuller projected, we crossed a line around 1970 where in terms of our capability, our extended capability, there were more haves than have-nots for the first time in 200,000 years of our existence. In other words, we could transcend the ontology or an ontology of scarcity, which is the context in which all human institutions evolved, and realize there is sufficiency for all within an ecological context. And if so, how could we measure it? And when would that perhaps occur? And what would it spell for us if we're in the birth canal of a new relationship in universe?
That's a very good question. It's one that's very near and dear to my heart, actually. It's not even a setup.
You can do shtick, brother.
It is the case, yes, that what human beings are really good at is acquire. I mean, I suppose it's Marxian in a sense, but acquiring scarce resources or acquiring resources and then making them scarce, so they can control access to them, so that other people have to pony up. Well, we really don't have to do that anymore. There's enough wealth that we don't have to have people out of their homes and people without health insurance. Oh, there's enough money, but it's this, you know, the way that we're still. I want all, you know, I want all of the flint arrowheads, because, you know, I want to make sure that my little group has the, you know, the most antelope meat. You know, okay, it was important once. It's not anymore. You know, but technology, unfortunately, is not a good or bad. It's its misuse, in my view, has exacerbated anew the differential between the haves and the have-nots, as we see now as wealth continues being redirected upwards.
But it has, Stuart, it has been characteristic of practically all of the human experience. That
Yes,
in all of our institutions, all of our assumptions of human nature and so forth. And are we at a period
Yes,
of
we are.
qualitatively crossing a major qualitative transformation in the evolution of events, comprehensively or conciliantly seen?
Well, there is an answer to that, actually.
Oh.
And the answer is yes. The answer is, will it happen? It's unknown, because let me give the answer as to why it could in the not-too-distant future. There are two technologies in development. One is referred to, most of us are probably familiar with fusion, right, nuclear fusion. But most of us are familiar with the large, expensive fusion processes, tokamak reactors or ITER reactors. You know, we're talking about a lot of money and a lot of political tail-dragging fueled by lobbyists, essentially, you know, corporations that want to extend the profits of fossil fuels. I mean, it's in the government records that it's largely a political delay, not so much technological. However, in Canada, there's something being developed called Bussard or polywell fusion. This is different. It's small. It's inexpensive. It was funded for only $8 million by only, I think, 8 and then another 7, maybe $13 to $15 million by the Obama administration to get to a prototype. And instead of billions of dollars in a prototype in 20 years or 30 years, ITER's supposed to be 10 years, but it's within a couple of years, possibly, of having a prototype. this is the closest thing we have to Mr. Fusion in Back to the Future.
Wow.
You know, I mean, it's actually something where every household, every individual could have a small compact fusion reactor. A fusion reactor, regardless of scale, makes more energy than it needs to run itself. That's it.
Yeah.
You don't need the grid, you don't need the oil, you don't need any of it.
Don't have pollution.
So that's way up, but there's another part too. So that's one thing. I think it's going to be, I think there's going to be an amazing battle, probably akin to an actual war over something like this.
Yeah.
Because power and wealth does not relinquish itself without a fight.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Second thing is something called nanofabrication. It's based on an existing technique called nanofabrication, where at an atomic or molecular level, we're developing the ability to create materials from the ground up. The end result is not unlike a Star Trek replicator, where it uses carbon and other basic atomic and molecular structures to literally print anything. Food, clothing, other printers. So the combination of individual energy fusion with personal fusion reactors and a printer that can supply all their material needs, powered by the fusion reactor, it's over. We're in if that happens, once that happens, we're in a post-scarcity economy.
If you can afford HPZ.
You know, very funny. Listen, Canon is worse. They have those little chips in there that make the little cartridge obsolete even when you still get it. So,
Really?
Yeah. But anyway, so that's the point. So those two, in answer to Harold's question, is that yes, we are, because those two technologies could be available to be deployed 20 years. I mean, it's not far off. It's not some far future. You know, it's related to something we've heard about with the Kurzweilian singularity, with the acceleration of technological development, where it's approaching an asymptote where it's so fast that you can't even keep up anymore. You can see the evidence in the short life cycles of like cell phones. Cell phone comes out, it's already obsolete. Whereas it used, you know, consumer electronics used to have a several-year life expectancy. Okay. So the question is, and then there are other things too. There's kind of like IP wars brewing in pharmaceuticals, trying to own actual genomic sequences, which is obscene. But so it really comes down to how far will governments allow corporations to go in not allowing human beings to finally be free. And I am not encouraged by current behavior, but at the same time, the technologies are almost here. And so the possibility is almost here for the first time.
I think that your idea of the possible battle when you come up with a source of energy which is incredibly cheap.
It's free.
And in essence, but what we're doing now is, I think that the lines are being drawn. I mean, there are the 1% of this country becoming incredibly wealthy, and controlling not just the resources, but also the means. I mean, when that printer comes out, you're still going to have a matrix for the printer. And these people are going to be owning the patent, the copyright, whatever it is.
Well, that's why actually one of the war fronts I see, there's been talk about water wars, by 2040 because of what's happening, but one of them will be IP wars. Where open source will battle IP ownership for access to the knowledge that will, that will free us from scarce resource economies. So I think there's some really good, I don't want to use the word interesting because it makes it sound like it's not going to be destructive. It will be, but it could be the make or break between a downward spiral that we seem to be entering into now. Even though there's less violence, there's people die by violence now than before in human history. The fact that so few people are intentionally depriving so many others of a quality of life that that if those other people had it, would not detract from those wealthy person's lifestyle. That whole consciousness is not encouraging. There's some indication that the thinking among them is that they're doing it as long as they can now to grab everything they can because they know a change is coming.
I think they're doing it now because they want to control in the future, not because they think the change is coming.
I think it might be both. They have a lot of plans set up for what to do when things go south.
Fuller said that we crossed that line at the level of capability around the year 1970, and there's modeling that shows that the extension of consciousness, both physical and intellectual in terms of technology and a weapon sense, had reached a point where they were species lethal about the same year, 1970. We've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and it's understandable because you're transcending 200,000 years of institutional structures and things they're all committed to, mindsets and so forth. What do you think that maybe we've already entered this period of qualitative transformation that we ought to start having our politicians relate to and other people, opinion setters, rather than just paying no attention to the paradigm of paradigm shifts, the transcendence of material scarcity, which is the adverse side of the destructive scenario?
You know, it's a really good question, Howard. And I think sometimes it can be seductive because species evolve in geological time.
Yes.
Now, it is true that the neocortex, the brain itself, but especially the neocortex, because it's self-modifying, evolves at a rate roughly 3 times that of the rest of our physiology. And we know now how to artificially accelerate evolution in the lab with relatively simple organisms. But I think that also that every member of a species doesn't evolve in lockstep. There are different mutations, there are different, there are advances, there are retreats. And it's tempting to think that because the technology is almost here, and because there are those of us who would do whatever we could to enable that transformation, that it's close. I'm not sure.
It's never mentioned.
I'm not sure.
It's never mentioned in the popular press.
Yeah, there's a reason for that too. There's a political reason, and there's also a reason that the press doesn't understand a lot of the ramifications of what it means to have non-scarcity as a result of free technology distribution.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But they are experiencing it. I mean, the publishing houses in Europe, the United States, for years they've been going crazy how to stay in business. Because as information transfers from a physical medium, i.e. paper, to bits, everything's going to bits, right? Digitally. And they have to struggle to remain alive. Well, that's the same thing for any physical infrastructure-focused corporation.
Well, wasn't part of that problem the distribution system? Like very antiquated distribution system?
Part of it is that, but it's hard to sell newspapers if people are going to get online. So now the New York Times has come up with a new fee structure to access this content. Might work, but we'll see.
Could it be if there was a huge dichotomy of the people who were informed and the people who don't seem to know anything about anything? Could that be that maybe there are people on this planet who are more spiritually evolved because they've come back maybe 2,000 times already to view this thing? Because it seems to me what happened in the French Revolution was brotherhood, fraternity, which is that everybody's connected idea. Everybody should have equality.
And guillotine.
So maybe that's what's working.
If that exists, it's hard to know.
I mean, it's the brain
It's hard to
thing,
know.
but it's a spiritual body.
It's possible. I don't know why some individuals are sensitive to disingenuous political rhetoric and others aren't. I'm not sure. That could be one way of looking at it. I do know that the illusion is that it's about information. Voting, at least in this country, is no longer about information. It's about, as Bush admitted at the end of his second term, propaganda. The thing about propaganda is you have to keep repeating it.
Well,
You know,
the country's been
so-
brainwashed for 50 years or 150 years.
It's been longer than that. We're essentially a Roman Empire, in a sense, the way we're structured. I mean, we are a republic, you know, maybe it's becoming a plutocracy, maybe it's becoming a corporate state, but it's essentially, you know, a Roman republic. So the point is that one thing that concerns me about, again, this looking into the future of the hopefully near-term future of the evolution of human beings and how we interact with our world and other people, is that it's not about information, it's not about how much we know, it's not about how much we understand, it's about something else. If you've ever tried to have, for example, a political conversation with someone who, let's say, would vote against their self-interest, why is it that, you know, it's a big question, why do voters vote against their self-interest? Well, there are a lot of reasons, and none of them have to do with how much information is available to them or how much they want to consume or don't want to consume. It's about finding a solution that confirms as we're talking about tonight, confirms their beliefs about the world and their place in it. And if they hear emotionally activating rhetoric that seems to make them feel that this politician understands them, that's it for the voters. They don't look at the platforms, they don't look at the issues, they don't look at the voting records. So with that, I don't know about spiritual or not spiritual, I do know that we have to come to a way of communicating with people who engage in serious political behavior based on metaphorical understandings rather than information-based interactions.
How do we do that?
Good
I run into that problem all the time. I think it's one of the key difficulties.
Yeah, it absolutely is. One way is very difficult because we want to explain, you know, and explaining just, you know, it's not going to do it. It's never done it. It's not going to do it. The only way that I've had any limited success is to speak metaphorically, is to communicate what I want to communicate in a way that was experiential, not about, well, you know, there are so many people every year who are this or this data or that, you know, it's turned up. But there is a reason that, for example, advertising has learned that you have a television commercial with one individual that somehow can reach an entire demographic because it's an emotional message that has a physical metaphor that demographic understands. And that motivates them to act. Doesn't motivate me to act because I know what they're doing, but it's, you know, so it's that form of communication.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Any pharmaceutical direct-to-consumer advertising. There's the information. This stuff will make you grow teeth on your knees. But they're going to take it because they relate emotionally and even imagery-wise, physically to the person the actor who's doing the ad. And so it's an emotional decision. It's confirming that this is safe, even though they're hearing this is not safe. We're using you as beta testers. You know, like that.
So aren't we like in the era of framing? I mean, a lot of what this is all about framing. You know?
Lakoff was certainly the man for the times in terms of that, absolutely.
So what you're basically saying is consilience is basically an aspect of human communication, nothing more?
The role of consilience to me in communication is that it allows one to ignore the internal walls that we experience when talking with someone in another discipline. For example, I mean, this is a really kind of a trite example, but I was in college and I was into bird watching and also computers, so I had a digital watch. And a friend of mine at the time, she said, well, wait, you like birds, how come you wear a digital watch? Well, that's the point. That consilient is a mindset that allows us to see that we have far more in common, and I don't mean in a humanistic way, although that's part of it, but in a way that, because I look at things one way and you look at things another way, I think art is important, you think science is important. There is no reason to have a wall between those 2 points of view. And in fact, there is a very encouraging trend in universities where at every CUNY, NYU, Columbia, a lot of them are now developing these multidisciplinary groups. Someone from neuroscience, someone from the philosophy of science, someone from quantum physics, because they're understanding that there's far more in common. I mean, usually in Siddhartha say we contribute to each other, but after they do it for a while, they understand that the language that they speak, that's just it. It's just different language for a phenomenon in common, which is the activity of the brain. It's all about that, at least for me and for Wilson.
No, but communication is effective only when it's directed at a belief system. And a belief system is a wall.
Belief system
Is a wall.
A belief system can and usually is a wall. I don't think by necessity it has to be if one understands the influence of that belief system on their speech and on their thinking. It can be acknowledged and viewed. For example, if I have an injury, I can't necessarily do what someone else would do, but that doesn't mean that there's a wall between we can communicate. So it's like that in terms of ideation for me as well, that I may believe something, but if I understand a belief to be what it is, which is not a necessary truth, but a way of holding ideas in a certain context, then I don't have to be wedded to that belief. It can be fluid, and I can let it go if I so choose. What the kind of belief you're talking about, I agree with. You're talking about the kind of belief that leads people to assert absolutely that, for example, dinosaurs and human beings grown together.
Yeah.
That, in fact, creationism is a viable alternative to evolutionary theory. That leads the more extreme of them to commit very, very unspeakable crimes against those who practice abortion services. Because that kind of belief, I agree with you, is absolutely a wall, and it's completely destructive.
Yeah, because the modality of most beliefs is either acceptance or rejection. There's hardly anything in between. And then one would say that were it not for that, then it would not even be a belief.
What if you
I have to
look at a
think about
man
that.
like,
I think I disagree. I think it's the adherence to the belief. I have beliefs, but I recognize them for what they are, and I don't pay any attention to them.
what about?
You see what I mean? So I can have beliefs, but because I'm sorry, I just want to finish. But because, I have beliefs about certain things, but I know them for what they are, I know where they come from, I know the memes that construct them, and I just ignore them the way one ignores, let's say, a kid having a tantrum for no good reason. It's there, but you don't have to let it inform your behavior. Well, I don't have to let it inform my thinking, just because it's there. That's what I'm saying. That it's possible, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what about a man like Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins? He wrote
He's very tall.
well, he's
He's very tall.
I know, he's close to 7 foot. Well, here's a man who came out of nowhere, supposedly, and developed the theory that motivation is really the way to stir the entire human race. And you're either out for pleasure, most people are, or you're out for pain. It's either the stick or the carrot. Now this man also had huge chapters on belief systems. And everybody has a different belief system. Everybody has a different belief system because everybody comes from a different place, from different experiences, and from different things that happened to them that they reacted to in life. But however, the theory of pleasure, which people go toward, and pain, which people go away from, motivates people. And this is what all the propaganda is all about.
Look,
And
he took
it's
some,
about fear
yeah,
and
sure.
death.
He took some basic,
Yeah,
he took
that's
some
the
basic
biggie.
Freudian constructs and made a lot of money with them. And
But he
that's
was
okay.
right.
That's
He was
what
right.
he did. He was right, but he's not right. Because he's saying that all there is our biological imperative to respond to pleasure and pain in that way. No, we have the ability to go way beyond that. We can endure pain if it's for a noble reason. We can avoid pleasure if it leads to circumstances and developments that are not in our best interest or other people's interest. We are not at the command of our biologically determined, genetically expressed behaviors. So he's wrong. He's limited, and it got a good response because, you know, it worked. So again, it's pragmatic, but it doesn't correspond to our true nature as human beings, in my view. In my view.
I think I disagree totally. I think it definitely corresponds to our very primitive nature.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The human aim.
I agree with that. I agree it's our primitive nature.
Right.
And we
to
have...
go and get killed because it's the brave thing to do, or because you're searching
Well, I
for
wasn't
some
actually
ideal.
talking about
That doesn't work either.
I actually wasn't talking about that, but I agree with that, but I wasn't talking about that. But what I am saying, though, is that we are not just primitive apes. There's a difference. And we have the ability to exercise that difference if we make the effort to learn how to do so. This is what I'm trying to address.
And we may be at a moment of qualitative transformation in a forward...
We've been there already.
Well-
You said Buckminster Fuller already wrote Utopia and Oblivion.
Well, okay. We've been through that, Frank. But
In terms of communication and framing, I mean, at the moment, our technology probably favors framing as a means to get across or influence people. But
Absolutely.
how does like consilience or even paradigm, how do we, because at the moment, if we stay in framing, we're going to be here for a long time.
Yeah.
So there has to be a way to activate the other two parts that you were talking about in order to bring them into the communication. No?
we're going to be here for a long time if we don't blow it all up. That's also that's a new capability that hasn't been here as recently as the Second World War. Something's happened. Okay, we're going to change tape.
That
Okay.
is a good question. And my main focus, again, even though